remote heart of Utah's rocky wilderness lies a network of subterranean passageways that once beckoned adventurers and spelunkers from all over the United States. Nutty Putty Cave. Known for its narrow tunnels and slippery clay-like walls, this cave was both a natural marvel and a looming danger. But on the evening of November 24, 2009, this unassuming stretch of rock would become the scene of one of the most harrowing and tragic caving accidents in modern history. A tragedy that would not only cost the life of a young man named John Edward Jones, but would also serve as a haunting reminder of nature's unforgiving terrain and human vulnerability. The story of John Edward Jones is not merely a tale of misadventure. It is a deeply human narrative filled with hope, determination, helplessness, and heartbreak. A 26-year-old medical student, devoted husband and father, John entered the Nutty Putty Cave for what was meant to be a short, nostalgic excursion with family during the Thanksgiving holiday. Instead, he became trapped in a narrow, uncharted passage, head first and upside down. Unable to move, breathe properly, or be rescued despite a grueling 27-hour effort by some of the most skilled rescuers in the region. This video delves deeply into the Nutty Putty Cave incident, not only to document what happened, but to explore why it happened, how it unfolded, and what its impact has been on the world of cave exploration and emergency rescue. Through detailed examination of the cave's design, John's fateful decisions, and the monumental efforts made to save him, we will attempt to understand the psychological and physical horror of the ordeal. Equally important is the reflection on the emotional trauma endured by John's family, the rescuers who fought against time and geology, and the broader public who followed the incident with hope and dread. Beyond the tragedy, the Nutty Putty Cave incident raises ethical questions. Should such caves be open to the public? Should the human body be retrieved from such inaccessible locations for closure or left as a memorial? And how should high-risk recreational activities be regulated in the face of inherent danger? The cave has since been permanently sealed, John's body entombed within the passage where he drew his last breath. His story has been memorialized in documentaries, dramatized in films like The Last Descent, and debated in forums about cave safety. Yet despite the widespread attention, the raw humanity at the core of the incident, one man alone in the dark, praying, talking to his unborn child, waiting, continues to echo in the silence of the stone. This video seeks not only to chronicle the tragic series of events, but also to give voice to the unanswered questions, to the emotional toll, and to the enduring lessons left behind by the man who never came out of the cave. Nutty Putty Cave is a hydrothermal cave located about 55 miles southwest of Salt Lake City, Utah, in Utah County, near the city of Alberta. Nestled in a desolate stretch of land surrounded by shrub-covered hills and dusty trails, the cave is part of a larger network of limestone formations shaped over millennia by geological forces. It is not a tourist destination, nor a scenic cavern with glittering stalactites and ambient lighting. Instead, Nutty Putty is an unrefined, muddy labyrinth of extremely narrow tunnels and chambers, many of which require visitors to crawl on their stomachs or squeeze sideways to pass through. The cave was discovered in 1960 by Dale Green, a local caving enthusiast who gave it the whimsical name Nutty Putty because of the soft, sticky, clay-like texture of the mud that coated its walls. The clay was rich in calcium carbonate, making it extremely slippery and capable of trapping even the most experienced spelunkers. Word of the cave quickly spread among local caving communities, and it became a popular spot for amateur explorers, Boy Scout groups, and thrill seekers. Despite its popularity, however, Nutty Putty was notoriously dangerous. Nutty Putty Cave stretches approximately 1,400 feet in length, but its navigable pathways are far fewer. The majority of the cave is made up of tight passageways, often no more than 10 to 18 inches in width, with twisting, slow descents and sharp drops. Some of its most infamous features include the birth canal, the Scout Eater, and the Big Slide, names that highlight the cave's uniquely constricted design and the difficulty of maneuvering through it. While the cave does contain a few larger chambers, such as the Big Slide and the Aorta, the allure of Nutty Putty came largely from its technical challenges and the physical thrill of squeezing through nearly impassable routes. Over the years, there were several close calls and minor rescue operations in the cave. In 2004, 2 separate rescue efforts were needed to free stuck cavers. One incident involved a 16-year-old Boy Scout who became wedged in a narrow tunnel for several hours before being extracted. These warnings led the Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration to temporarily close the cave for public access in 2006 to review safety protocols and implement access permits. After a brief period of restriction and consideration, the cave was reopened to the public in 2009 with new safety regulations, just months before the fatal incident that would shut it down forever. What makes Nutty Putty Cave especially dangerous is its deceptive layout. Some passageways that appear wide at first glance suddenly taper down into impassable crevices. This is precisely what happened to John Edward Jones. He mistook a narrow tunnel for the well-known birth canal, a section cavers could usually pass through with some effort, but instead entered an unmapped, unknown fissure that gradually narrowed to a width no human could pass. By the time he realized the mistake, he was lodged upside down in an 18-inch wide chute over 400 feet from the entrance, and it was too late to reverse his position. The cave's layout also posed serious challenges for rescue efforts. The narrow passages left no room for large equipment or tools, and any attempt to reach John required maneuvering in incredibly cramped conditions. The cave's low oxygen environment, fluctuating temperatures, and slippery mud only added to the difficulty. After John's tragic death, Nutty Putty Cave was permanently sealed by the state of Utah. Large concrete plugs were placed at the cave's entrance, and it was declared a gravesite, effectively becoming a tomb for John's body, which rescuers were unable to retrieve. This closure was controversial, but widely accepted as a necessary step to prevent further tragedies. Today, Nutty Putty Cave remains a symbol of both the allure and peril of extreme adventure. It stands as a stark reminder that nature's hidden places, while fascinating and beautiful, are not always meant to be conquered. The story of this cave is not just about geology, it is about the fine line between exploration and recklessness, about human fragility in the face of unforgiving terrain, and about the devastating consequences of underestimating nature's power. John Edward Jones was not a thrill seeker by profession, nor an expert caver. He was a 26-year-old medical student, devoted husband, and father-to-be. Born on January 21, 1983, in St. George, Utah, John grew up in a devout Mormon family with a strong emphasis on values like faith, perseverance, and close familial ties. His upbringing in Utah's adventurous landscape naturally exposed him to activities like hiking, camping, and caving, which he occasionally pursued with his father and siblings. Though he had not been actively caving in recent years due to the demands of his medical school education and growing family responsibilities, he was no stranger to underground exploration. John was known for his kind demeanor, sharp intellect, and deep commitment to his loved ones. He and his wife Emily had a 13-month-old daughter, and they were expecting their second child. Life was busy, filled with studies and responsibilities. But during the Thanksgiving week of 2009, John and his family returned to Utah to reunite with relatives and enjoy some time together. It was during this break that John, his younger brother Josh, and a group of friends and family members decided to embark on an outing to Nutty Putty Cave, a nostalgic trip that John saw as a fun and relatively safe adventure. On the evening of November 24, 2009, the group arrived at Nutty Putty Cave around 8 p.m. The plan was to explore for an hour or two, enjoy the challenges of crawling through tight spaces, and then head back to their homes. John had entered the cave with enthusiasm, perhaps unaware that the cave had changed since his last visit, or that a series of closures and reopenings had reshaped public access and safety concerns. After passing through familiar sections of the cave like the Scout Eater and the Big Slide, John began searching for the so-called birth canal, a famously narrow but navigable section that cavers often tackled as a rite of passage. Crawling ahead of his group in the low-ceilinged, muddy tunnel, John spotted what he believed was the entrance to the birth canal. It was in fact an unmapped, extremely tight crevice, no wider than 10-18 inches in some areas, and sloping head-first downward at a near vertical angle. John proceeded feet first initially, but quickly realized the angle was too steep and difficult to descend in that position. Attempting to maneuver, he rotated to head first and tried to push himself forward. At about 400 feet into the cave, deep within a sloped section later known as Ed's Push, John's body became stuck. He could not go forward, nor could he reverse his movement. His arms were pinned at his sides, and gravity now worked against him, pulling blood toward his head and causing immense physical pressure. At first, he remained calm. He called out to Josh, who quickly made his way to him and realized the severity of the situation. John's position was dire. His torso was bent in a constricted angle, upside down with barely any room to breathe or expand his chest. Josh immediately left the narrow corridor to get help, and by 9 p.m., calls were made to emergency services. Rescue crews from the Utah County Sheriff's Office, along with trained volunteer cave rescuers and medical personnel, began arriving shortly after. What was expected to be a routine extraction evolved rapidly into one of the most difficult cave rescue efforts in modern U.S. history. As rescuers began assessing the situation, they discovered that John was trapped nearly upside down at a 70-80 degree angle, with very limited access. The passage was so narrow that rescue equipment, harnesses, and even basic tools could barely fit. Over the next 24 hours, more than 100 personnel rotated in shifts to try and free John using pulleys, ropes, drilling equipment, and makeshift platforms for support. A rescuer managed to tie John with a rope harness and pull him up about 12-18 inches, enough for him to catch a full breath and engage in brief conversation with his wife via a radio line. John was reportedly in good spirits despite the pain. He prayed aloud, spoke about his wife and unborn child, and tried to reassure those around him. One rescuer described John as the most composed man he had ever seen under such horrifying circumstances. John even joked briefly with his rescuers and told them he appreciated their efforts. But time was not on his side. His inverted position was causing blood to pool in his head and lungs, a dangerous condition known as positional asphyxia. Hours dragged on. Exhaustion, fear, and physiological distress set in. At one point, a pulley system set up to extract John failed catastrophically when an anchor drilled into the cave wall broke free, causing a violent jolt that dropped John several inches lower than before, further worsening his position and injuries. Rescue attempts had to pause, and medical personnel were no longer able to reach him directly due to the instability of the passage. By the early hours of November 25th, John's condition had drastically declined. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Around midday, he stopped responding altogether. A rescuer was able to reach his position one last time, and after a final medical evaluation, it was confirmed that John Edward Jones had died, approximately 27 hours after becoming trapped. His official cause of death was cardiac arrest due to prolonged upside-down suspension and compression asphyxia. It was a quiet, tragic end to a hopeful rescue effort and a devastating moment for his family, who had remained above ground, praying and waiting for good news. John's death sent shock waves across the caving community and the nation. A young, promising man had lost his life, not because of recklessness, but due to a tragic miscalculation in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The heartbreak was compounded by the fact that his body could not be recovered. The narrow passage made extraction impossible without extreme risk to future rescuers. His remains still lie entombed within the cave, in the exact spot where he took his last breath. The rescue operation to save John Edward Jones from Nutty Putty Cave was one of the most complex and grueling cave rescues ever attempted in the United States. Spanning over 27 hours, the mission involved more than 137 individuals, including cave rescue experts, paramedics, engineers, law enforcement, and volunteers. What began as a hopeful recovery quickly devolved into a heartbreaking standoff against nature's cruel indifference, a race against time, gravity, and the frailty of the human body. When the first 911 call was placed around 9 p.m., on November 24, 2009, emergency services in Utah County acted swiftly. A small crew arrived within the hour, and upon initial assessment, they realized that John was stuck in a section of the cave far deeper and narrower than previously assumed. Located roughly 400 feet from the cave entrance, John was pinned in a vertical crevice barely 18 inches wide, upside down at nearly an 80-degree angle, with his arms trapped at his sides. This position alone posed an extreme medical risk. Prolonged inversion could lead to positional asphyxia, cerebral edema, and cardiac arrest. From the start, logistics were a nightmare. Nutty Putty Cave was difficult to navigate even without an emergency. The passage leading to John's location, later known as Ed's Push, was nearly impassable to adults with full gear. Rescuers had to crawl or slither through tight spaces, often unable to bring stretchers, power tools, or even turn around. Communication was patchy. Lighting was minimal. The mud-like walls made it impossible to gain footing or anchor equipment easily. The first major challenge was assessing whether John could be pulled out using conventional rope and pulley systems. Engineers and cave experts devised a series of mechanical pulley systems using high-tension ropes, climbing gear, and makeshift winches. By early morning, one such system succeeded in pulling John 12 to 18 inches upward, briefly giving rescuers hope. He was able to breathe better and even speak with his family using a radio connected to the surface. He exchanged emotional messages with his pregnant wife, Emily, and spoke tenderly about his 1-year-old daughter, Lizzie. Despite the pain and fear, John expressed gratitude to the rescuers, apologizing for the trouble he was causing and encouraging them not to give up. However, the cave's geology fought back. As rescuers continued drilling and anchoring bolts into the cave wall to support the rope system, tragedy struck. A crucial anchor bolt gave way due to the unstable nature of the limestone and clay, causing the entire pulley mechanism to fail. The system collapsed, and John was violently jerked downward, undoing the limited progress made and worsening his position. The jolt caused additional physical trauma, bruising his body and further compressing his chest and diaphragm. After this collapse, any movement became even more dangerous. Drilling further was deemed too risky both for John and the rescuers. The cave walls were unpredictable, and there was growing concern that any further structural shifts might cause a collapse, trapping more individuals or blocking the only access point. Over the course of the night and into the next day, rescue crews rotated in short, exhausting shifts to try alternative methods. They used air chisels to widen passage, attempted to lubricate John's body with cooking oil and medical gel, and even considered breaking his legs to reposition him. However, each idea posed its own risks. The sheer angle of John's entrapment meant that any downward shift could crush his chest, and with little room to maneuver tools, every second counted. Simultaneously, medical personnel worked tirelessly to monitor John's condition from within the cave and from the surface. Fluids were delivered through IV lines, though it became increasingly difficult to sustain them due to the positioning. Blood pooled in John's upper body, causing intense pain, swelling, and pressure on his brain. His breathing became shallow. His speech slowed. Despite this, John remained spiritually strong. He prayed aloud. He talked about God, love, and faith. He recalled family memories and asked rescuers to sing hymns. One rescuer, Susie Matola, who stayed close to him for hours, described the situation as both tragic and profoundly sacred. John was never completely alone. Someone was always by his side or within arm's reach, offering words of comfort, holding his hand, or simply being present in the darkness with him. By noon on November 25th, over 24 hours since John had first entered the cave, his condition became critical. His breathing slowed to a stop, and his pulse weakened. A final effort was made to access him directly, but he was unresponsive. Paramedics confirmed the worst. John Edward Jones had died, most likely from cardiac arrest due to positional asphyxia and organ failure. His head-down position had caused his body to shut down. He had endured over 26 hours trapped in a confined space, upside down, with limited circulation and overwhelming internal pressure. The moment of confirmation was devastating. Rescuers cried. Some had to be helped out of the cave, not due to exhaustion alone, but from emotional collapse. Many had held out hope to the very end, believing that if anyone could survive such conditions, it would be John strong, composed, and resilient. The news was relayed to John's wife and family, who had been stationed above ground throughout the ordeal, offering prayers, awaiting updates, and holding each other through what had quickly become a nightmare. A new dilemma arose in the aftermath of John's death: retrieving his body. Initially, there were plans to continue widening the passage and bring him out for a proper burial. However, structural analysis revealed that any further excavation posed extreme risks of collapse. The cave's integrity had been compromised by the drilling, and the narrow vertical shaft was unstable. Rescuers would have to work upside down themselves, putting their own lives in danger for an uncertain outcome. After consultations with engineers, cave specialists, and John's family, a heart-wrenching decision was made. His body would remain in the cave. Within a week, officials sealed the tunnel with concrete, placing a memorial plaque near the entrance. The entire Nutty Putty Cave was closed permanently and declared a tomb not out of neglect, but as a sign of respect, recognition, and safety. The rescue operation remains a case study in emergency response, cave safety, and human endurance. It was marked not by failure, but by extraordinary courage, compassion, and cooperation. The rescuers did everything they could within the bounds of safety and reason. They gave their all physically, emotionally, and spiritually to try to bring one man home. And though the mission ended in tragedy, it also shined a light on the human spirit. In the darkest of places, John Jones remained a beacon of faith, love, and dignity. The men and women who tried to save him became quiet heroes, carrying with them the weight of one of the most poignant rescue stories of our time. The story of John Edward Jones's entrapment and death in Nutty Putty Cave is not merely a tale of physical tragedy. It is also a profound psychological and emotional experience that reverberated far beyond the cave walls. From John himself, to his family, to the rescuers, and even to the public who followed the incident in real time, the emotional toll was immense and lasting. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching aspect of the entire ordeal is trying to understand the psychological torment that John must have endured during those 27 hours. Trapped upside down, with no control over his body, and in a space where he could barely breathe or move, he was forced to confront a reality few can imagine: total helplessness. Claustrophobia, panic, and fear of death are primal responses in such situations, and yet by all accounts, John remained calm, faithful, and incredibly strong. He prayed, he sang hymns, he asked rescuers to read scripture. He even made jokes to keep the spirits of those around him high. In one account, a rescuer reported that John asked him to sing a song to fill the silence. These actions were not just signs of faith, but psychological coping mechanisms. John was finding ways to keep his mind engaged and his hope alive. However, the psychological strain was unmistakable. As time went on, his voice weakened. He slipped into unconsciousness intermittently. At one point, he apologized to a rescuer, saying, "I'm so sorry I'm putting you through this." These words speak volumes. They show a man deeply aware of the emotional weight of his circumstances, not only on himself, but on everyone around him. While John was enduring the physical nightmare underground, his wife, Emily, his parents, and other family members were stationed above ground, experiencing a different kind of horror waiting. The emotional weight of watching someone you love die slowly, just a few feet below, separated by unforgiving rock, is unfathomable. Emily, who was pregnant with their second child, remained in the area throughout the rescue attempt. At one point, rescuers relayed messages between John and Emily via a radio. She was able to express her love and encouragement. They prayed together. She told him to be strong for their children. The pain of those final conversations, brief and fragile, left an enduring scar on those who witnessed them. After his death, Emily and the family made the unthinkable decision to leave John's body in the cave. It was not one of choice, but of necessity. That decision, while supported by experts, would haunt them forever. To grieve without a body, to know your loved one is encased in stone, is a unique kind of emotional burden, a grief without closure. The men and women who descended into Nutty Putty Cave to try and save John were not just professionals. They were volunteers, fellow humans with their own fears and emotions. Many were experienced cavers and rescuers, but even their training could not prepare them for the psychological intensity of this mission. They had to crawl into dark, suffocating tunnels to try to comfort and free a man they had never met. They spoke with him, held his hand, offered him water, and shared his pain. The bond between rescuer and victim became almost familial. They were not just rescuing a stranger, they were trying to save a brother, and when they failed, it crushed many of them. Several rescuers have since spoken about the lasting emotional trauma. Some reported symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. One rescuer described the moment John died as a silence that swallowed us whole. Another said he never went into a cave again. This incident also sparked a profound existential questioning for many. Could more have been done? Should more risks have been taken? Why did this happen to such a good person? These are the questions that echo in the minds of rescuers and family members alike, questions without satisfying answers. News of John's entrapment spread rapidly. As the rescue effort continued through the night and into the next day, people around the country followed the story, clinging to hope. Social media was flooded with messages of support, prayers, and expressions of concern. When his death was announced, there was a collective wave of mourning, even among those who had never met him. John's story resonated because it exposed raw human vulnerability, a strong, faithful man reduced to complete powerlessness. His bravery, his faith, and the love of his family made the tragedy intensely personal for many. Documentaries, YouTube videos, and the feature film The Last Descent have since tried to capture this emotional weight, but for those who lived through it, no retelling can ever truly convey the deep grief and haunting silence that followed. The tragedy of John Edward Jones's death in Nutty Putty Cave did not end when the rescue effort was called off. In many ways, the true complexity of the event began in the aftermath. It gave rise to emotional debates, legal discussions, ethical dilemmas, and permanent decisions that affected both the caving community and the general public. One of the most controversial and emotionally charged aspects of the Nutty Putty Cave incident was the decision to leave John's body in the cave permanently. Initially, rescuers and engineers had discussed ways to extract his remains, with the intention of giving his family a traditional burial. However, further geological assessments revealed a sobering truth: the cave was too dangerous. John was trapped in a near-vertical tunnel that was now even more unstable due to rescue efforts. Several anchors had failed. Portions of the rock had fractured. Any attempt to dislodge his body would have required breaking apart the cave from within, a task that would put additional rescuers' lives at risk. The final decision was made in consultation with John's family, cave rescue experts, and the Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, SITLA, which manages the land. On December 1st, 2009, just 1 week after John's death, the cave was permanently sealed. A concrete plug was placed over the passage where John lay, turning the site into his final resting place. This action sparked considerable public debate. Many people supported the decision, recognizing the real danger of attempting further extraction. Others were horrified at the idea of leaving a human being entombed underground, arguing that more should have been done. Some even called for the cave to be reopened for recovery in the future, but the consensus remained that doing so would be irresponsible and dangerous. As part of the aftermath, Nutty Putty Cave was closed to the public indefinitely. The entrance was filled with concrete, and warning signs were placed to inform future generations of the tragedy that occurred. SITLA officially declared the cave off limits, and the Utah County Sheriff's Office stated that it would never be opened again. This closure wasn't merely a symbolic gesture, it was a practical and preventative measure. The cave had a long history of rescues and close calls. John was not the first person to get stuck inside. He was just the first to die. In fact, Nutty Putty had been temporarily closed in 2004 and 2006 due to prior incidents, only to be reopened under strict conditions in 2009. John's death marked the final warning. This cave was simply too dangerous for public exploration. The closure was mourned by the caving community, many of whom viewed Nutty Putty as a valuable technical training ground. However, even seasoned spelunkers admitted that its unpredictable geometry, soft limestone, and tight vertical passages made it a ticking time bomb. There was widespread agreement that no cave was worth another life. Beyond the physical and logistical decisions, John's death also raised deeper ethical questions about extreme recreation, responsibility, and the balance between human curiosity and respect for nature. Nutty Putty wasn't a commercial cave with lighting and railings. It was a raw, muddy fissure that required serious skill to navigate. Critics argued that its access policy, even with permits and waivers, was too lax, and that caves of this nature should be reserved only for the most qualified explorers. John was an intelligent man. He wasn't reckless, and he entered the cave with knowledge of its dangers. But he also misidentified a passage and paid the ultimate price. Some argue that the cave's signage or maps should have been clearer. Others say nature isn't obligated to be labeled for safety. This question haunts many cave rescue teams worldwide. John's situation could have resulted in multiple fatalities if additional cave-ins or collapses had occurred. The line between rescue and recovery, between hope and realism, is thin and ethically complex. Rescuers are trained to save lives, but not to die in vain. The choice to entomb John where he died was heartbreaking, but many argue it was also profoundly respectful. Instead of risking lives or desecrating the cave, he was left with dignity and peace. The site is now sacred ground, not just a geological formation, but a memorial. John's story became widely known in the years following the tragedy. A plaque was placed at the sealed cave entrance bearing his name, honoring his memory. In 2016, the independent film The Last Descent was released, dramatizing the final hours of John's life. The film was made with permission and cooperation from his family, and it portrayed John's faith, love, and final moments with reverence and emotional depth. YouTube documentaries, rescue reenactments, and articles have also kept the memory alive, sparking discussion and raising awareness about cave safety. While some worry that such portrayals romanticize a tragedy, many see them as necessary tools for education and remembrance. Today, Nutty Putty Cave stands as a sealed monument to human fragility and resilience, a place no one will ever enter again, but one that changed countless lives. The story of John Edward Jones and the Nutty Putty Cave incident is one that continues to haunt, teach, and inspire even more than a decade after it happened. Though it ended in heartbreaking tragedy, the legacy John left behind and the lessons learned from the rescue effort have deeply impacted the worlds of caving, emergency response, public safety, and human empathy. John Edward Jones was a man of strong faith, deep love for his family, and admirable resilience. Those who knew him remember him as kind, intelligent, and devoted to a life of service. A medical student, a husband, a father, and a brother, his roles were grounded in compassion and dedication. In the darkest moments of his life, John did not give in to fear or despair. He prayed, he forgave, he encouraged others. He even cracked jokes with rescuers to ease their burdens. It was a strength that seemed to come from beyond physical endurance, a spiritual reservoir of peace that helped him face unimaginable fear with grace. His wife, Emily, gave birth to their second child months after his death. Though John never got to hold that child, his family continues to honor his memory through acts of faith, storytelling, and the preservation of his example of courage. John's story in this way transcends its physical context. It is no longer just about a cave. It is about a man who, when faced with the worst, chose love over fear. One of the most immediate legacies of John's death was a renewed and intense scrutiny on caving safety protocols. While Nutty Putty Cave was particularly dangerous due to its structure, the incident highlighted issues that applied to all forms of extreme outdoor activity. One of the key mistakes that led to John's entrapment was his misidentification of a passageway. He believed he was entering a well-known tight section, the birth canal, but instead crawled into an unmapped vertical fissure. This has since pushed cave administrators to prioritize more precise mapping and clear labeling, especially in technically challenging caves. Many caves, particularly in the United States, now require more rigorous permitting procedures, ensuring that only qualified or well-informed explorers are allowed in. Organizations also recommend detailed pre-trip briefings and emergency planning as standard practice. The Nutty Putty incident became a training case for cave rescue teams around the world. Workshops, scenario drills, and safety modules now include John's case as a cautionary example. This has led to improved gear design, more compact medical equipment, and specialized rope systems tailored for extremely confined spaces. The closure of Nutty Putty Cave reignited debates in the caving community about public access to dangerous caves. Should all caves be open? Should some be sealed forever? The balance between freedom and responsibility remains a live issue, and John's story sits at the center of that ongoing conversation. The Nutty Putty Cave incident also left a profound cultural and emotional legacy. It sparked discussions not just about adventure and risk, but about mortality, sacrifice, and dignity. People who had never stepped into a cave or heard of Utah were moved by John's story. His name became a symbol not of failure, but of human strength in the face of overwhelming odds. The film, The Last Descent, 2016, created with the blessing of John's family, brought this story to a new audience. The film avoided sensationalism, instead focusing on John's character, his love for his family, and his spiritual resilience. Viewers were not just shown the mechanical struggle of a cave rescue, but the emotional dimensions of a man slowly confronting the possibility of death while holding on to hope. John's story continues to circulate on social media, YouTube, and podcasts. His face smiling, young, full of life appears in thumbnail images alongside headlines of horror. But what keeps people returning to the story is not the shock of the event, but the humanity of it, the empathy, the heartbreak, the stillness of that cave, holding the memory of someone who never stopped loving and believing. While no tragedy can be undone, it can be learned from. The Nutty Putty Cave incident teaches us multiple lessons, not only about adventure safety, but about life itself. The importance of knowing the environment you're entering, whether it's a cave, a mountain, or a sea, cannot be overstated. Adventure without adequate preparation can turn fatal very quickly. John's bravery wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. He endured isolation, fear, and pain with extraordinary grace. His courage reminds us that true strength often lies in vulnerability. Though John could not be saved, the men and women who stayed by his side, spoke to him, comforted him, and risked themselves for his sake, displayed profound heroism. Success is not always measured by outcome, but by intention and compassion. Emily Jones and her family suffered an unimaginable loss, but through grief they chose remembrance. They chose to share John's story, not hide it. That courage to face the public, to face the memory, is itself a legacy of strength. There is a lesson in humility here. No matter how advanced our tools or how noble our efforts, nature will sometimes claim what it will. This doesn't mean we should stop trying, but it does mean we must approach such spaces with awe, respect, and caution. The Nutty Putty Cave incident is not a story you forget. It lives in the minds of those who followed it, those who tried to stop it, and those who continue to explore the edges of the earth where few dare to go. But above all, it lives in the heart of a man who, even in death, taught us what it means to endure. John Edward Jones entered Nutty Putty Cave, seeking a brief adventure, a return to childhood explorations, a moment of bonding with family. He never left, but he is not lost. He remains not just physically in the stone of that sealed cave, but spiritually in the lives he touched, the lessons he taught, and the silence he dignified. His story is one of tragedy, yes, but also of humanity at its most raw and most beautiful.